The following video is about propaganda versus opinion versus fact versus truth versus truth. If you agree with something that someone is saying, immediately go check yourself. Make sure that you are not being fooled. Because if you refuse to do that basic test, you are automatically the fool. Claim under a YouTube video. Oregon Senate Bill 1596 says that you as a consumer should have the ability to make, fix, and repair your own consumer goods. By definition, a consumer good is designed to be used and disposed of. A durable good is designed to be used for over 5 years and then disposed of. Over 5 years can be 100 years, but it's a durable good. Then there's commercial goods, which is a completely different thing, but it's goods created for the purpose of making money in their usage and or existence, but not to be resold. Let's move on. Do we also get the freedom to make and build what we want, or just what they want us to repair and or build because it was a consumer good? Good question. Is this supposed to be a groundbreaking? This is supposed to be groundbreaking, which is good. No longer are we at the mercy of having to send it off to the corporation for fixes. Now, let's move forward. But in the same state Oregon Senate Bill 1596 exists in, Oregon House Bill, is Oregon's way of forcing you to serialize your firearms and prevent you from making your own parts. What's going on? Yes, I know this is the Senate Bill 1596 is not for firearms, but again, this is an argument someone came up with in a video. And all I did was cut and paste the description, and obviously I've rewritten it to make it a little bit more usable. When you have laws that conflict with each other, you create a controversy within the legal system. When you write your laws badly or with ill intent that can be easily shown, should that invalidate the laws? This is the right to repair rule of a pre-existing item that you've purchased. But he's saying here that it also includes, quote, to make, fix, and repair. If you're not aware of what the word make, this person used it correctly, is you're making it, but you're not intending to manufacture it, which is a definition of a person making something to resell. If I make a laptop computer and I'm going to use it for myself, I don't have to follow a lot of rules because I'm only going to affect me, hopefully. But if I make it to resell and never intend to use it so I don't have to deal with the consequences, there's a bunch of implications about this. If I make a car for my own usage, I can legally request that I be given a vehicle identification number by the DMV, and I can even compel them to do it, even if they're mad at me, because in the old days, if you made an electric car, the DMV didn't want to deal with the paperwork because it didn't have cylinders. It was rated in watts instead of horsepower. They didn't want to deal with it. But legally speaking, because the electric car technically was sold in the United States, in many states, Oregon even before, it was sold here. There are registrations of electric cars, so there's precedent. They can't argue that. But they fought really hard to avoid it and lost a court case where you have to register someone putting in a washing machine motor, that's a direct quote, a washing machine motor in their car and driving it. You have to. We don't want to do it if they made it from scratch. You have to. You can't make it to where only large corporations can make a freaking, I almost said firearm, only a large corporation can make a car. You're denying people's right to build their own goddamn cars. See where this is going? A car can be driven in such a way that you're reckless and you kill somebody. A firearm can be used for shooting targets, but if you miss the target and don't provide adequate protection, you can shoot the next door neighbor's cat or the neighbor. You are held responsible for these things, but not the manufacturer because, again, if you're making something, someone has to deal with the consequences of your manufacturer defects or your bad design or not having a proper sear on it so it goes off on a movie set because you made a poorly made goddamn gun, Pieta. But are you really responsible? In the case of one case, obviously. In the other cases, No, if someone irresponsibly drives a car and runs into a bunch of people or deliberately does it, you're not held responsible just because you didn't make the bumper smooth surfaced. That's not a reasonable expectation. Boeing is not responsible for the people who unalived themselves on September 11th. There, I said it. However, they're definitely responsible for the fucking engines falling off. I'm not going to rant this time. I'm a good boy. Now we're going to get to House Bill 2005 again, Oregon's way of forcing you to serialize your firearms. Well, why would anybody law-abiding have a problem with that? Lots and lots of antique firearms were made before serial numbers were required. They didn't have serial numbers on them. Some of them are craft-made, meaning they were made as, demos by the person who made it. Putting a serial number on it is altering a museum piece. In some places, it's illegal to put a serial number on something like that because you're falsifying a serial number. So there's a fuck ton of precedent for not requiring these things because they're onerous, because it's obnoxious, because it presumes guilt. If you create a law presuming guilt, you violated one of the principles in the law of presumed innocence. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's move on to the next commentary. Now, this is a commentary not from a YouTuber who may or may not be misinterpreting things, but obviously gets the subject matter. There's a controversy here. Many. That's only the tip of the iceberg, sir. Thank you for making the video. It was nice. I'll link it below. Now we're going to listen to a court judge tell us saying the quiet part out loud. Plaintiffs have not offered evidence to support the implication that unserialized firearms, receivers, frames, whether they're finished or not, if they lack a serial number, are in common use by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. Which is absolutely in contradiction to the fact that virtually every gun made before a certain date, if it was a specific type of gun, usually it was shotguns, but not always, had no serial number. You dumbass. And he also says undetectable firearms. You're conflating the idea of a number being stamped into it to it being invisible or a ghost gun, right? Or it being made of plastic. Do I have to whip out my plastic flare gun that can technically chamber a 12-gauge shell? Do I really have to go there? Why would someone, for law-abiding, lawful purposes, need a gun made of plastic to do destructive ballistic testing on something that isn't made out of steel to see where it'll blow up first? Because there's a specific type of plastic which happens to be completely see-through. It's actually plexiglass variety that you use to test where the gun's going to blow up, so you don't have to test metal ones that don't. Zinc doesn't work because it literally just shatters, and it's actually more dangerous. But the plexiglass ones show plastic and non-plastic deformation in firearms frames, receivers, barrels, and breech faces. That's an analysis subject in a science paper. But I wouldn't be able to reproduce the results, which is required for a scientific paper to be reviewed, because I'm not allowed to make an all-plastic 12-gauge, or in my case, I'd be building a 50 BMG duplicate by getting Mark Serbu to send me the specs so I could build an all-plastic version of the gun that blew up on Conductive Ballistics channel and do a real explosives test in high-speed motion, recording an all-plastic gun blowing up while recording it at high speed to see where it blew up, not by loading the hot round that was salted because someone put in pistol propellant instead of rifle propellant. I would put in a normal round because I would presume it would blow up. Then I would escalate the pressure until it did blow up in a way that matches the Conductive Ballistics one. Why would I do that? So that we can build an analog for every gun where we can test it to destruction without building it out of metal. It's PVC or whatever plastic. I'll be using clear. Well, that's a ghost gun. First of all, ghost gun actually means something specific. It had a serial number, and the serial number was removed, so the serial number is declared dead. That's actually where this comes from. There was a decision in a court that if somebody removes the serial number still applies to it, but since we can't track it anymore, effectively the serial number is now a dead file. So it should be declared a ghost gun. That's where the term came from. It was a legal decision in a court someplace, and that popularized the term because ghost gun caught on. It has a legal definition. It doesn't apply to guns that you can't see because they're made of clear plastic. Or untraceable guns. It means the file about the gun, because it had a serial number, is a dead file because the serial number no longer is applied anywhere. You can't reuse the serial number because that would be considered falsifying a serial number. What's the other legitimate use for making a gun part without putting a serial number on it? It's a mass-produced gun made from a location that makes a bunch of metal blanks. The aluminum blanks are sent to one company to make pellet guns, another one to make BB guns, another one to make literal paintball guns, another one for legal, street legal, civilian, semi-automatic rifles, and another location is a military location where they want all of these in stock to keep making the AR-15 fully automatic. It can't start with any of the dimpling or marks on it because they have to apply them later. That's why some of the marks are out because they're molded in, they are above the surface, and some are pushed into the metal because they stamp them in. Some of them started off life exclusively being machine guns, but the company that makes them wants to have none of those restrictions, so they don't finish it, and they can't do most of the milling internally, so they just left it a blank space. They do the milling they can get away with, and the ATF was asked, do we have to serialize these? And the serial number requirement was, by the ATF, it's illegal for you to serialize it, it's not a gun yet, in conflict with federal law. Thanks, Oregon. Plaintiffs have offered no reason anyone would implication. What do you mean implication? No evidence for firearms and receivers and unfinished frames and receivers that have no serial number. That's a lie. It's not a mistake. You know damn good and well you were wrong. You were presented that. We don't give me evidence. Every gun before 1960, basically, and virtually all of them made before they're completely finished, being shipped from Canada. This was to avoid import tax. The U.S. government okayed it. Or from Mexico for your engine part. Yeah, there's a bunch of laws like this. We're talking about how these laws apply to everything, not just guns, like the guy said. Plaintiffs have offered no evidence as to why a law-abiding citizen would prefer, you mean getting in their head, would prefer, except for illicit purposes, an undetectable firearm or an unserialized firearm, which this means that the judge is confusing a gun made of plastic for a gun that never had a serial number versus a gun that had a serial number and was ground off. I don't think that word means what you think it means. Well, Waptec, why would anybody buy an undetectable firearm? 12-gauge flare guns do not have serial numbers. They have type approval numbers from the U.S. Coast Guard. They don't have serial numbers. And they're undetectable on an X-ray machine or metal detector. Oops, nope, they're not anymore. We've advanced the technology to where you can detect whether or not there's toothpicks in the bag. And it can chamber a 12-gauge shell just fine. It can also chamber a 50 BMG cartridge because, fuck, of course it does for some goddamn reason. But why would anybody legitimately need something that could do that? Because it's a fucking flare gun and it's required by law if you're going to be in a boat. Knucklehead! Feel free to use that soundbite. So let's review. The most commonly used for untraceable, undetectable firearms, as being badly defined here, trying to avoid using the word ghost gun, is for illegal purposes. Evidence presented indicates the opposite of legal purposes. It's always illicit purposes. I did a video where I looked up how many times a ghost gun has been used at all in a crime. It's an extreme minority. Anyway, it's a $1,000 fine the first time you do it, $6,000 or more for the second time you go to jail for almost a year, third time you go to jail for like 10 years, and you get a $250,000 fine. They're all Class B felonies in the state of Oregon. Unserialized versus undetectable versus never had a serial number versus it's a fucking flare gun or a Nerf gun. Yes, someone tried to apply this to Nerf guns at one time. And pellet guns. Suddenly we're turned into Great Britain with their crazy bullshit application of laws. If you write a law badly to be misinterpreted, it shouldn't be a law. And if your intent was to say these things when they're absolutely never been true, you're a liar, not a judge. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. You're going